Hello everybody, love it or loathe it, you cannot deny the Jaguar E-Type is an automotive icon. This is a legend in the metal. It's a superstar of the swinging 60s, a car so gorgeous that even Enzo Ferrari himself said the only problem with it was that it didn't have one of his badges on it. But for the last 8 years, I have politely declined any and every opportunity I've been given to drive one. Until today. So, why is it that I've been so hesitant? Why finally have I capitulated? And has it been worth the wait? Find out in today's very special episode of JAYEMM on Cars. Il Commendatore himself showered the E-Type with such magnificent praise has been the subject of some debate. But what is not is the fact that when this car landed in 1961, it caused a storm. Not just the motoring world, but the world at large paid attention, because here you had a true game changer. And though that is a saying too often wheeled out these days, for the E-Type it was absolutely apt. This was a car that featured an engine displacing 3.8 litres across 6 cylinders with a trio of SU carburetors, making in excess of 260 horsepower, 260 pounds-feet, able to drag it allegedly to a claimed top speed of 150 mile an hour, Bugatti Veyron numbers in its day. It also had to then stop it 4-wheel disc brakes at the back inboard. Its construction technology and aerodynamics were derived from the then recent and highly successful D-Type racer, a novel construction method pairing a lightweight front subframe bolted then to a unitary construction in place of the traditional ladder-on-frame construction that was the order of the day. Radial tyres. It still today gets a lot of admiring looks, glances, and I should point out, that was a bunch of cyclists. Even they love the old Jag. Most notorious of all, though, is its ability to get allegedly to 150 mile an hour. And although even back in the day, more or less everybody knew that it probably didn't, it did get ruddy close. Not wishing to neglect the handling, the front suspension setup was then paired with a new independent rear at the back. And though nearly all of these things had been seen before, not all of them had been seen together, and certainly not at this price. The E-Type was an icon the moment it landed. But what's my problem with it? Why is it that every time someone's offered me one, I've said no? Well, that's for a very simple reason. You see, my father, as a child of technically the late 1950s, practically the 1960s and 70s, grew up with 2 cars that he felt were the most beautiful ever. The Jaguar E-Type and the Ferrari Dino, the 206 and 246. And for much of their later life, these cars were both, in some way, shape or form, relatively affordable, but it took until 2001 before Dad finally bit the bullet and bought his own. Unfortunately, though I think at the time he could have afforded a Dino, instead he decided to get the E-Type first and bought a magnificent Series 1 example in Roman purple, a very special colour that I hadn't seen before and haven't seen since. It was also sold with a magnificent story that it was bought originally by Graham Hill as a gift for one of his mechanics. It was also allegedly the one and only E-Type ever tuned by Coombs of Guildford, the notorious tinkerers of many a getaway Mark II. And a lovely story it was, but unfortunately I later found out it was complete and total bollocks. You see, Dad sadly had bought his car from JD Classics, then world-renowned Jaguar specialists, today world-renowned fraudsters. And if you want to know more about that story, I've done a whole video on it. But regardless of the story, Dad generally kind of enjoyed his car. It was very, very fruity, had bespoke manifolds, a near straight-through exhaust, and on one memorable day, we took it out to a top speed day where it did 127 miles an hour. That's verified. Took 1.5 miles to get there, and 3/4 of a mile to slow it down. And though I always respected the E-Type, never really loved it. When he and my mother parted ways, the E-Type was then sold, and as far as I was aware, that was the last I was ever going to see of it. Until a number of years later, very fortuitously, I discovered that Dad's old car was now owned by Jaguar themselves. It is a part of the Jaguar Heritage Collection, FHJ 281D. I call it a Series 1. I thought initially it was a Series 1.5, but Anorax have later told me it is a Series 1.25. More on this in a little bit. In any case, though I'm certainly not an E-Type fan, the idea of being able to drive Dad's E-Type was still one that really appealed to me, and I felt a brilliant way to get an introduction to what is certainly a legendary car. I went down, saw it, did a little video with it, but unfortunately at the time, neither the weather or the car were right for a drive. And so they said, yep, sure, don't worry, we will organise it for you to come back soon. Sadly, COVID then happened, and after that, Jaguar themselves had a bit of a reshuffle. And regrettably, despite many efforts over the last few years, I haven't been able to successfully get in touch with the person at Jaguar who can organise a drive in Dad's old car for me. But regardless, I held out hope and waited for somebody to get back to me. And it was this hope that meant whenever anybody emailed me and said, James, would you like to drive my E-Type? I said, thank you very much, but no, there is one that I am waiting for. Until this week, when I paid a visit to a man called Paul, who lives in the beautiful Principality of Andorra. And he's invited me down here to come and sample some of the magnificent cars in his eclectic collection. And in the corner was this stunning red left-hand drive US import E-Type Roadster. And he said, James, you should take the E-Type out. And my first response was, no, Paul, it's lovely, thank you very much, I appreciate that, but I'm okay. And then I stopped and I thought, you know, if ever there were a place to take this kind of car out, it's got to be here, right? So I capitulated, and I have now driven a Jaguar E-Type. All of these years later, what's it like? Well, a great surprise in a number of ways. In a lot of them, it is, as I would expect any old 1960s car to be. So it's a reasonably tight cabin. This being a Roadster is the strict two-seater. Midway through the first series of E-Type, Jaguar introduced the 2+2 layout, which kind of knackered the looks because it lengthened the wheelbase by 9 inches, though it did add 2 semi-useful seats in the back. The alternative to that was the fixed-head coupe, the regular two-seater which Dad had, and the one that many would believe is the prettiest of them all. I used to agree with Dad on that, but recently, having seen quite a few Roadsters, I'm actually starting to think that maybe this is the one. Regardless, it's got nice classic Smith's gauges, a ludicrously large and very thin-rimmed steering wheel, which does actually have basic telescopic adjustment. It's got a very, very tight pedal box, and when I went to put my seatbelt on, I spent about 5 minutes looking for it before realising I had been stupid. This mirror is also just about usable provided it's in its place, which most of the time it's not, and this one on the side here is for decorative purposes only. Now, during the course of its life, the E-Type went through a number of changes. First, the engine was enlarged from 3.8 to 4.2 litres, and along with it came a modest boost in both power and torque. In 1968, the Series 2 then arrived, and with it came a number of changes. So the formerly covered headlights became open, the interior then received a change, with the old push-button starter and key in the centre being replaced with a more traditional 1970s setup of rocker switches. The trio of SUs was then replaced with a pair of Strombergs, and power took a modest dip, going down to some 240 horses, though torque remained roughly the same. Along with the new engine also came a new gearbox. Formerly it had used the much maligned Moss box, a 4-speed without synchro on first. The later cars then used a still 4-speed but Jaguar designed, and now with synchros on all gears. It is by all accounts a much better box. Finally, at the beginning of the 1970s, we had the Series 3, which then took the car until its end in 1974, at which point it was replaced by the rather different, but today I think much better understood, XJS. Just about nobody likes the Series 3, partly because it's not a particularly pretty thing. It is amazing how even minor changes in the proportions of a car can totally ruin its looks. And that is exactly what happened with the E-Type. This was done not just to keep the car fresh, but to meet ever stricter regulations, particularly in the US market. Finally, the classic XK Straight 6 was then retired in favour of a 5.3-litre V12, an engine which itself had a very long life, serving in Jaguar products for over 20 years. So, which is it that I'm driving today? Well, this would be best described as a Series 1.5 car. And just to make matters worse, not only are there differences between a UK and a US E-Type, there are also differences between a UK and a US Series 1.5. But what makes it a 1.5? Well, as you might expect, these were transitional cars built during the sort of 1967 to 1968 period when the factory was gearing up for Series 2 production. So at the front it looks very much like a Series 2 with the open headlights, and in here it has the dash of a Series 2. But it's not a Series 2, it is a Series 1 engine, a Series 1 gearbox, and Series 1 suspension and brakes, for what little good that actually does it. Truth is though, nearly 60 years after it rolled off the production line, numbers don't really matter so much anymore. Instead, it's the experience. And here's where I have to say, the E-Type has been a really pleasant surprise. This particular car, which is owned by my good friend Paul, is not only in this absolutely sensational red that I am assured is its original colour. Doesn't look like it, it's very, very metallic for a 60s colour, but it's wonderful, and it was bought by him from Peter Vardy Classics a number of years ago. He has subsequently brought it to join him in Andorra, and I've got to say, Paul, you are inspired. This is a fabulous car to have here. I really couldn't believe, as soon as I got off the line with it, just how easy it was to drive. These were available from the factory with both power steering and air conditioning. I know it doesn't have the latter, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't have the former. Regardless, even manoeuvring it around town, the steering doesn't require too much effort, the clutch is beautiful, the gearbox surprisingly cooperative, and this is a car that feels very, very modern to drive. I haven't had any need to lean on the brakes, but they're intuitive, they're communicative, and very, very narrow pedal box aside, this is a car that I wager just about anybody could just hop in and drive. Sure, the seats are a little unusual, and on occasion in a bend they're a little bit tight, but very, very quickly you realise that this is a car all about the experience. People wave at you, people shout at you, people give you the thumbs up. Somebody spoke to me yesterday in, I'm pretty sure it wasn't Spanish. They speak Catalan here. And if you thought my Spanish was bad, it extends to sí, no, and sin alcohol or sin plomo, well, my Catalan is truly tragic. But knowing what little I did, I am fairly sure they wanted to have my babies. And he seemed like a lovely chap, it has to be said, but I did tell him, let him down gently, that I was spoken for, and he seemed a bit dejected about that, but still, he did love the car and asked me to give it a bit of lost beans as I left the petrol station. I'm just going to stop for a minute. There's nobody behind me. I know there's nobody behind me because there's a couple of campers over there, they're not moving, and behind me is a border. There's no Andorra left. And this right here, this is just, well, this is magnificent. I'm gonna take you out your perch here. I know I don't normally do this because it's horribly unprofessional and very vlogger of me, but just look at that. Now let's be honest here together, shall we? This is a nice car to drive for a 1960s car. But I have a bit of a problem with cars like this. You see, people are always talking to me and asking me about cars as investments, so on and so forth. And the E-Type has certainly gone up in value of late. Series 1 examples in particular. They are the most beautiful, they are the most desirable. I get that. Nobody really lusted after a Series 3, I don't think. This one, of course, also has its fair share of quirks and features. When the gearbox does get hot, it can occasionally be a little bit pernickety. The steering, though pleasant enough at low speeds, is still from a 1960s car, and I am grateful for the sunshine because it'll get very chilly in here very quickly. The roof, incidentally, is actually a fairly easy and simple affair. It's no first-gen MX-5, and as an aside, one of those, even with the 1.6 in, would run rings around this, but it still works nicely enough. Actually, I was really quite happy with that. I thought it would be really complicated. The boot isn't particularly big, limiting this car's ability as a tourer, but nowhere near as much as the gearing. If I put this into fourth now, top gear, I am doing just over 30 miles an hour at 25 RPM, until it then jumps out of fourth. This, I believe, is a function of it being a US car. They had a different final drive in them, and so these were never ever going to do the claimed 150. I believe this came from the era of the 55 mile an hour speed limit, so Jaguar wisely probably thought selling a 150 mile an hour car, a bit pointless. This, also being a roadster, is rather limited in terms of headroom, as you may be able to see from that camera. Mine goes above the roof, and if I were to somehow flip this, well, this would crumble instantly. Though that would be fine, because I'd likely already be dead from whatever other impact it was that the car had suffered. Open that front hinged bonnet, which always goes perilously close to the ground, and you'll see there isn't really much under it at all. To give it some credit though, you can certainly push on enough that to regular modern traffic, you wouldn't be a hindrance. Because it's so ludicrously narrow too, you can even overtake a cyclist on a road like this, give them plenty of room, and still not be on the other side of the road. It also doesn't sound quite as good as I thought it might. It certainly goes okay, doesn't feel 260 horsepower strong to me, especially when you consider the fact it's allegedly a sub 1300 kilo car on account of its light construction. The throttle pedal also has barely any travel. It's got like an inch worth, and you really need to mash it into the floor if you want it to go. And then you very quickly realise it revs like a diesel. You think it's just about to start going, and then it hits the red line, and you got to change up. Though you'll forgive me if I don't really give it the big one on this road, because as you can probably tell, the penalty for failure here is rather severe. But that's okay. That's not a problem, because this car transcends all of that. It doesn't matter at all. The E-Type is an interesting car. Sometimes I speak to people that are curious to know why it is that the younger generation aren't really into it. Some of them are, some of them really, really like it, but generally speaking, they don't get it. They don't have the same excitement for it that the previous generation do. And I think that's for a very, very simple reason. This wasn't the car of my youth. It's as plain as that, in the same way that I wouldn't expect my granddad to get excited about a Ferrari 458 Speziale, nor do I really expect kids to get excited about an E-Type. But I tell you what's amazing about this car, kids don't know what this is. They have no clue, no concept. They don't know how old it is, they don't know how special it is, they don't know how fast it is, they don't know how expensive it is. But they love it. They absolutely love it. They go bananas for the E-Type, as do their parents and as do their parents. And though it hasn't really ever previously done that much for me, I gotta say, I'm really starting to get this car. And though if you said to me, James, do you want to take this car over to Barcelona? About a 3.5 hour round trip in something normal. I'd say no, please, anything but the E-Type, because it'd be A, terrifying, and B, horrible on the motorway. Right here, right now, this E-Type is the best car in the world. You could offer me the keys to a Pagani Zonda, but on this particular road, wouldn't hold a candle to the old Jag. There are some cars out there that make you feel like royalty, a king, a sultan. There are some that make you feel like a rock star, some like a racing driver. This one makes me feel like Peter Sellers. Let's face it, I got the wardrobe of a 1960s playboy, and today I've got the car. So, was it worth the wait? You bet. And so, the next big question, one for you. Should I start driving more E-Types? Get into the murky world of resto mods? Find out what else E-Type owners get up to? Or should I leave this as my one and only time behind the wheel? Is this an experience I can ever top? Would I be sad if I didn't? I don't think I would. Anyway, I think that just about wraps it up for today. I want to say a huge thank you to Paul for having me out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.